Anyways, my name's Beverly, and this is our Three Sisters garden, or what's left of it. It was a much nicer garden earlier, but we had a lot of storm damage and a lot of animal damage, so we're just trying to coax it along for the rest of the year.
Okay.
And hopefully, we can get through the school programs that we have scheduled and still have some corn standing. Now, in this area, up until about 1,000 years ago, the Indians were mostly hunters and gatherers because it was so cold around here. They really couldn't grow any crops. But then there was a period of warming that occurred. It was known as the medieval optimum or medieval warm period. And it did cause the temperature to rise enough that these Indians could finally start growing some crops.
So when was this?
That was from about 900 to 1400 AD is when that happened.
Okay.
And so once it warmed up here, these Indians traded with Indians from warmer parts of this country to get the seeds they needed to plant and the knowledge of how to plant them.
Okay.
So the first thing they found out was if you want plants to grow, you need nice, open, sunny fields. And they lived, of course, where there were quite a few trees. So those trees had to come down.
Okay.
And before Europeans arrived in this area, the Indians had no metal tools, only tools made of stone, bone, or wood. So to knock down a tree, they would use a stone axe like this and a process called girdling. Pretend this is a tree with bark on it. They would take their axe and they would chop a circle around the tree. They would be cutting through the bark and the cambial layer and just into the wooden part. And all that they were doing was cutting off the nutrition from the roots, and eventually it would kill the tree. It could take anywhere from 1 to 3 years to kill that tree. Then once it was dead, they would just burn it down, and the ashes became their fertilizer. So they would use those ashes, or take the ashes and scatter it over the land where they were going to grow their crops. Now that was the job of the men. After that, the men were the hunters. They would take off hunting. So all of the farming chores fell on the backs of the women. First thing the women would do, pull up all the weeds. Then they had to loosen the earth. And to do that, they used digging sticks like this. And each woman had their own. It was just a basic stick that was sharpened on the end and hardened in a fire. And with a lot of effort, you can loosen the earth. But it takes a lot of work because the earth hadn't been worked and there were roots and rocks. And they dug down about 6 or 8 inches in depth.
Okay.
And they would start with small gardens. And over the course of a few years, they would be expanded until a lot of them were many, many acres in size. Once the soil was loose to plant the crops, they didn't plant those seeds in straight rows. They actually planted in hills and mounds like you see in the garden. So to make those, they might have used an elk scapula tool like this or a sharpened stone tool like this to scoop the loose soil into a mound and then finally plant their crops. And the crops that were most often planted were known as the Three Sisters crops. It's a companion method of gardening where one crop helps another to grow. And those crops are corn, beans, and squash. So first they would plant Sister Corn, and then right next to her in the mound they would plant Sister Bean, which was a pole bean variety, meaning she had to wind herself around something for support, so she used Sister Corn. So corn supported bean, bean helped corn. Not that the Indians knew why this worked, this was just a traditional planting method for them, but when you figure it out, corn needs nitrogen to grow. Beans are a nitrogen fixer.
Wow.
They do have the ability to remove nitrogen from the atmosphere, deposit it in the soil. There's a bacteria in the soil that works to transfer it to the corn. So now we have Sister Bean helping Sister Corn. As it grows, it gets very large leaves. So when the sun shines on those leaves, it shields the earth underneath. And that helped to keep moisture in the soil, and they kept the weeds from growing. Wow. So this method worked very nicely for them. To protect their gardens, they did use watchers' towers. They would build these structures that were about 8 to 10 foot tall. They would have a little platform on top, and currently ours fell over. We have to rebuild. So that is on the slate for before the school programs start. And those platforms would hold about 2 or 3 people, and the women and children would sit there and watch the fields. And if they saw the animals, they got rid of them because they depended on this food. And once they did, it allowed them to become a stationary people. Up to this point, hunters and gatherers, so moving constantly. Now they could live in these palisaded villages for safety. The villages could grow larger because they could feed more people. And the best part was they could finally store a lot of the food that they grew. So agriculture was very important for them.
How, because I'm not a history or archaeology student, let's say 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
They were all hunter-gatherers, right?
In this area, yes. In other areas, warmer areas, they were already growing crops, because crops have been grown in the Americas for 6,000 to 9,000 years. Corn, anyways.
Okay, really? Wow.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Corn, particularly. But
Okay.
go on with your question.
Okay, so until which part where they were all hunter-gatherers, was it like until, let's say, Pennsylvania, Ohio, or was it like almost until like Texas?
Okay, hunters and gatherers at this point in this area, they would have been, it was too cold. There was that warming trend, but it was like regionalized.
Okay.
So to the south of here, even before that, they were growing crops, and to the north of here, they were growing crops.
Oh.
But there was like a...
There's no like hemispherical...
just because this area and that area,
Oh,
it was
that's
not that
interesting.
defined.
Okay.
It was not that defined.
Okay.
So,
yeah, my original question was, when we talk about any hunter-gatherers, right? So how much did they move? Did they move on like almost an yearly basis, or like that's?
now that is information I don't even have.
Okay.
Because that is something I just don't have that information.
Okay.
I can't tell you. I wish I did.
Okay. Because I mean, I always wondered if they moved. I mean, the idea is they used the resources and they just moved.
And it was cyclical as far as, the seasons. So they would have moved more with the seasons, I would imagine, while they were hunters and gatherers, because, of course, the further south you get, there would be more food,
right?
Because the climate is more temperate, and there would be more to gather.
Yeah.
The animals would have been probably better. In these northern climes, it would have been a little tougher. But
yeah.
That's, I don't know that answer. I wish I had it. But.
Yeah, because my understanding was that the hunter-gatherers, let's say we are here, whatever this place is, right?
Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Western Pennsylvania. So we use up a lot of the plants and animals there are, and then we keep moving south. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me if I'm a hunter-gatherer, right? But we keep, like in Meadowcroft Rockshelter, we find that for 16,000 years there's like people coming over. So that's weird.
So yeah, they would stay, once they did start a system of agriculture, they would stay in an area until the ground would become less fertile, until they would overhunt the area, use up their natural resources, and they would move on at that point. But hunting and gathering, I think they would have continued just in my
they come in circles?
They probably would have. I mean, it's logical, but I don't know.
Okay.
I just don't have that information, and I'm sorry about that, but
no, it's okay.
I just don't. Yes, takes a lot of work pounding to get that corn into corn mill, let me tell you. But we just have our storage containers and things that we keep things locked up in. So not appropriate.
So these wigwams were used by what kind of like Native Americans?
Monongahela, the people, I think some Seneca, some Shawnee.
Okay.
There are other tribes in other parts of the country that used a wigwam-shaped structure also. So.
Okay.